Hi, this is Captain Bob from Mariners Learning System. We're going to be going through from application to approval this evening, understanding the captain's license and requirements. I'm the owner and founder of Mariners Learning System, a school that is approved by the Coast Guard to teach people to get their captain's licenses. We've been doing this stuff since 2002. We've trained more than 200,000 captains to get their license. This kind of an informal presentation. Although we're going to be talking about the application and the specifics of the application, I'm not going to be going into the finite details of how to fill out your application, but anyone who's going through this process should find this to be very informative. So let's get going. I'm also joined by Sammy, our VP of Operations. She will be taking any questions and feeding them to me so that I can get you the information, the answers. And as is the case with most of these types of presentations or webinars, at the end there'll be an offer for any of those who stick all the way through this, who might want to make some sort of a purchase. We'll try to help you along that process. Just to get going, a little bit of housekeeping. We want to make sure that you have your audio is turned on, and in the bottom of your screen you'll see an audio a button. That way you can make sure that the audio is adjusted as necessary. And then next, down in the bottom, you're going to see a Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. Over on the right-hand side, you'll be able to plug in your questions. As I said, Sammy is prepared to answer the questions that she can. At the end of each one of these sections, she's going to feed me with any questions that are outstanding, and then we'll talk our ways through them. As an overview for this presentation, we're going to primarily be focusing on people who are getting their original OUPV, our six-pack license, or their master's license. There is a renewal process for those who've had their license for 5 years. Every 5 years, you do need to renew your license. Although we will talk about some of those steps and some of those processes, that's not the primary focus of this. This particular webinar is designed for those who are looking to apply for their original license, whether it's a six-pack or a master's level license. We've been doing this stuff for a long time, and the Coast Guard statistics indicate that the most delays in the licensing process are due to mistakes or oversights in the preparation of the application paperwork. Many people will say that the paperwork was the most difficult process within the licensing and obtaining their credentials. I'm one of those people who happens to agree with that. For myself, I'm a business guy. I can make a high-stake business deal and it doesn't bother me. But tell me that I have to renew my driver's license or my captain's license and I'm a mess. So some people can do this really easily. Others, it's a little bit more challenging. Hopefully by the end of this evening, everybody will realize that you do have the abilities of filling out the paperwork on your own. We're here to help with the process with any questions that you may have as you're going through it. And during this presentation, you'll see that we've partnered with another company called MMCs, who their primary goal in life is to help people with the paperwork, and we'll talk through that as well. As we're discussing this webinar, I may use some acronyms that are very common within our industry. MMC stands for Merchant Mariner Credentials. That's basically your captain's license. That's what most people would call your captain's license in today's world. It kind of looks like a passport. The NMC, National Maritime Center, that is the head of the Coast Guard. This is where all your credentials are going to be approved and processed and sent out from. And then the CG just stands for Coast Guard. I could use USCG. Most time I will just say Coast Guard, but if I do say CG, or if we see that as an acronym used within a form or something like that, just be aware of what we're referring to. So if you're on this particular call and you're looking to upgrade an OUPV to a master's license, so if you currently hold a six-pack and you want to upgrade your license, which there is a path, or if you've got a master's level license, the master's level license is issued on 3 versions: a 25, a 50, or 100-ton license. It's not uncommon for somebody to begin with getting their license, a master's level license, as a 25-ton license, And then as they increase their exposure and their experience, they may want to increase the tonnage to 50 or 100 ton. There is a path for that. And also if you're looking just to increase the scope. So when we're talking about scope and licensing, you have inland licenses and near coastal licenses. So if you have a master's license that was issued as an inland license and you've now gained the experience to increase your scope to a near coastal license, there is a process for that. And then finally, if you've got a master's license and you're looking to increase the tonnage of the scope, or you want to add a endorsement to an existing license, that's not really primarily what we'll be discussing during this webinar. We will talk about it briefly, but if you have specific questions, you can either type them in the question and answers on this webinar, or you can reach out to us after this is over during our normal business hours. So there's a series of forms that we need to submit to the Coast Guard for our application. This is a checklist that mariners will provide for you when you're going through the licensing process. The primary forms that we're going to be discussing tonight is the application form. The Coast Guard calls it CG 719B. The next one is called the Small Vessel Sea Service Form, which is CG 719S. We'll be going through the drug testing form 719P. We'll also look at the medical certificate, the conviction disclosure statement. We're going to talk a little bit about the TWIC card. The TWIC card is a Transportation Workers Identification Credential. This is something that all original license applicants will need to go through, and basically it's a background check. We'll talk a little bit about the adult CPR and basic first aid requirement. We'll talk about course completion certificates, fees associated with getting your license. So this is kind of the foundation of what we'll be building upon tonight. To get a license, just as a general statement, there's several requirements. You need to have a minimum of 360 days worth of boating experience. 90 of those days need to be done within the last 3 years. The Coast Guard calls that recency. If you own your own boat, you can sign off your own time. If it was on friends or family's boats, they can sign that time off for you. We're going to go into the Small Vessel Sea Service form a little bit further, but I just want to clarify that. You're going to have to pass a physical and a drug test. The drug test is a DOT-approved drug test, the same one that most truckers have to take. You're going to have to, as I said, that TWIC card, Transportation Workers Identification Credential, that's that background check. You're going to need we'll talk a little bit about that further as well. So those are the basic requirements of getting your license, and we'll talk about how to record those. Another important piece, if you see this up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the circle with a date. It says expired 4/30/2026. This is the expiration date of all the current forms. In the past, they were outdated. They would be from March 31st, 2021, even though it was 22, 23, or even part of 24. So when people would call us all the time and say, oh, my form is outdated, or the form that you have on your website is outdated, we would talk to the National Maritime Center, and they would basically say that that date on there wasn't the expiration date of that form. It was the date that they had to review to make sure that form was still current. I don't know if that was so true or not, but in today's world, all the forms should have 04/30/2026. If you have filled out an older current version of form, or I would strongly recommend, or we strongly recommend, that you reach out to the National Maritime Center and tell them that these are the forms, the outdated forms that you used, and ask if they're going to still accept them. There's generally a period of time that they will accept them. I think we're beyond that. Depending on how long ago you filled out your forms, perhaps you've got a sea service form that Dad had signed off for you that maybe he's no longer here with you, or situations like that. So if there's any questions, I would speak to the National Maritime Center directly. And if they say, no, those forms are fine, I would ask them to send me an email. It's really difficult when you submit your paperwork to say, well, I was talking to somebody on the phone and they told me my form was fine. What you want to do is make sure that if you do go to the National Maritime Center and they do provide you with information, be smart, ask them to send you an email. That way you can include that email with your paperwork stating that, yes, I was approved to use these forms and I don't have to update them. Just some advice. So we're going to begin now. We'll go into the first form, CG 719B, the application for merchant mariner credential. So this is the form that you're going to have to fill out when you're submitting for your actual captain's license. We'll see that up in the top where we have page 1 and 2 is just basic instructions to tell you how to fill out this form. On the top of this page, this happens to be page 3 of that form. This has the information of the applicant. You'll have to enter your Social Security number if this is your first license. That's how the Coast Guard tracks this information through Social Security. Once you're within their system, they're going to provide you with a reference number. That reference number will replace your Social Security number, and they will be used on all your communications back and forth between the Coast Guard. So it's important to remember that you're going to have to disclose your Social Security number for your first application, the first license that you're applying for. And then once they've received that information, they're going to provide you with a reference number that you will use with all future communications. Then down in the bottom left, you'll see we have a circle, that's section 2. This is where you're going to tell them what you're actually applying for. In this particular situation, because it's an original license, you're going to check off the box that says Officer Original. So that's what you're looking to do. And on the right-hand side, as you go through this, there's an area kind of like in the center. It will say raise grade, new endorsement, or increase in scope. So if you've checked off the original officer, you're going to check off the checkbox for the new endorsement. And then you'll see there's an open box down here where you can now write in the exact endorsement that you're looking to obtain. So if you've got a 6-pack license, or if you're applying for a 6-pack license, you can get a towing endorsement. It's called an assistance towing endorsement. This allows you to offer assistance towing to vessels that have run out of gas. They may have run aground. They need assistance. It's kind of like the AAA of our industry. So that's called a towing endorsement, and that's the endorsement that you can put on an OUPV 6-pack or a charter boat captain's license. They're one and the same. For a master's level license, there are 2 endorsements. You can put the towing endorsement on it, or if you are a sailor and you're taking more than 6 paying passengers out on the water, then you would need what they call a sailing endorsement. And this is a requirement if you're going to be running charters on what they call an inspected passenger vessel, a vessel that was built or inspected specifically for commercial operations with more than 6 people on board. You will know if your boat qualifies for that because the Coast Guard would have done a special inspection, and there would be something called a COI, a certificate of inspection. This certificate of inspection will tell you how you can use the boat, if there's any special requirements for crew members, where you can actually do this. If you have any safety equipment, it will tell you how many people you can have on the vessel. It will tell you whether you can operate only during the day or at nighttime. So it's very, very specific. If you have your own vessel or a commercial vessel and it is approved by the Coast Guard for more than 6 paying passengers, then for sure you'll have that COI or the certificate of inspection. So the next section here, this is kind of like an important piece to this, and this is an area where people get a little bit of agina. So this is your safety and suitability. So remember, you've got people's lives in your hands if you're a licensed captain, and the Coast Guard takes this seriously, as we all should and do. So the Coast Guard is going to want to make sure that you are suitable for running charters or charging a fee as a professional captain. Within this, there's going to be some questions that they're going to ask that you need to answer truthfully, and depending on your answer, you may have to take additional actions and or perhaps not. So some of the areas that they're going to be asking you with when they're looking at the suitability is your criminal record. Now, I'm going to go over a couple of these things. I'm not going to read them all, but I'm going to go over a couple of these things just randomly. The thing to remember is when they're asking these questions of you, and the Coast Guard does your TWIC card, which is that background check, they kind of already know the answer to these questions. They're really testing to see whether you're being truthful and honorable and honest. So even if some of these questions are unfavorable to your past, do not lie. Do not tell them something different than what is actually true, because again, the Transportation Identification Credential, the TWIC card, this is run by TSA, and it's a very thorough background check. They probably know the answers to these questions already. With the original license, everybody has to get a TWIC card, so it's not something that you can be exempt from. When it comes down to renewals and things like that, there are some exemptions, but for an original license, there is no exemption. You're going to need to get a TWIC card. So some of the questions that they're going to be asking, first one, have you ever been a user or addicted to dangerous drugs, including marijuana, within the last 10 years? Now, we live in a state that marijuana is legal for recreational purposes. Please remember that although your state may recognize marijuana as being okay, this is a federal license issued by the federal government. The federal government does not recognize recreational marijuana as a behavior that is acceptable to them. In fact, if you smoke pot, you're going to have to be on a random drug testing program, which we'll talk about in a moment. But if you're using drugs recreationally, you are going to have to pass the drug test at least once to get the license. But if you plan on using the license professionally, you're going to have to be in a random drug testing program, which means that you could be tested at any moment. And if your name gets called, you have to go within 3 business days. If you don't, they're going to count that as a failure. So they want to know whether you've used or been addicted to dangerous drugs. They want to know whether you have gone, if you've had a court martial for your military, have you been convicted in the military by a military court? They want to know if you've had any sort of fatal traffic accidents, if you've been ticketed for reckless driving or racing, operating a motor vehicle while underneath the influence, are impaired by alcohol or controlled substance. So DWIs, they're very concerned about. We're going to go in deeper in a few moments. So even if you have a DWI in your past, that is not a disqualifier. So these are just the base questions. We'll talk about what you need to do in a moment, depending on what your answers are. They want to know whether your driver's license has been revoked or suspended for refusing to submit to an alcohol or drug test. In the Coast Guard's world, if you refuse to take an alcohol or drug test in a traffic stop, then they would consider you to be guilty of DWI or driving while intoxicated. And then they want to know whether you've ever failed a drug test within the last 10 years. Depending on what you do as a profession, some people are required to take drug tests just as their regular occupation. If you are one of those people, for instance, a military person, a first responder, a police officer, or a fire person, you may be in a random drug testing program. They want to know whether you failed that test within the last 10 years. And again, all these things that I just read off are not automatic disqualifiers, but they are certainly an area that the Coast Guard is concerned with. Next, you're going to have to check this National Driver Registry. This gives the Coast Guard the ability of reviewing your driver records. If you don't click this off, they're not going to have access to your driver registry, and they're not going to be able to process the paperwork. So for those of you who are sitting back saying, ooh, this doesn't sound good, I'm going to go into a moment of whether it is or is not good for you. But again, anytime the Coast Guard is asking these types of questions, I cannot state strongly enough that you want to be truthful with them, because especially with this sort of stuff, because they are doing a background check on you, they probably already have this information. It's literally just a confirmation as to whether you're being honest or deceitful. So There's another area on this. So this is a mariner's outreach. This is kind of like optional. This is sort of like if you're a military person or if you're in the National Guard and there's some sort of a national emergency, you can be called up. So this is an optional program that if you have your captain's license and there is some sort of national emergency, then by checking this, your name will go into a database. And if they need licensed captains for moving gear or food, or if there's some sort of a hurricane or some sort of national disaster that they need licensed captains, by checking yes on this, you're put into a pool of potential people that they can call upon. If you say no, it's not going to hurt you. So it's not a yes, we like you, or no, you're going into the wrong pile. It doesn't matter what your answer is, but if you feel that you would like to help, that's where you would select yes. I selected yes 25 years ago, and I'm still waiting for my call. So either I don't have the skills that they're looking for, or fortunately enough, there hasn't been any national emergencies that we need this to be enacted. The next is the oath. So there is an oath for getting your captain's license. In the old days, you had to have somebody who was certified read the oath to you, and then they would have to sign off on this, and then you would submit the paperwork. In today's world, the Coast Guard will accept your signature instead of going to the bank or some other place and have somebody who is certified that you actually took this oath. So that's sections 3 and section 4 of your original application paperwork. Now, for the consent, this last piece is only if you hired somebody to fill out your application and your paperwork. There are third-party companies that will do this for you. This is just how you record that information for them. So that's the end of the first form. Let me see whether Sammy's got any questions. I hear her typing away feverishly over there, but I don't know whether she's got anything outstanding. Do you have anything for us, Sammy?
People want to know first, do they need to have these forms completed to start with us?
Sure. So that's a great question. So the question is, do I need to have the forms filled out prior to taking a course with us or any other approved school? And the answer is no. So if you plan on testing with the Coast Guard directly, which I would not recommend regardless of where you choose to go, I don't know anyone who knows this stuff much better than me. Not a great claim to fame, just an end result of what I do every day. If I took the Coast Guard's exam for captain's licensing 3 times, and if I failed it twice, I wouldn't be embarrassed. They use a database with a lot of old and antiquated questions. And if you look online, you can find that there's literally tens of thousands of Coast Guard questions that are out there. Any of those questions can be on your test. Working with a school such as ours, we wrote the course, and Mariners also wrote the final exam. So not only do we control the course content, we also control the testing aspect of this, which is all approved by the Coast Guard. It's not a wink, wink, wink. However, the database that we use is much smaller than that of the Coast Guard. So back to the question. Do I have to fill out the form? So if I were to go to the Coast Guard directly for the exam, they would require that I fill out the forms and I get the approval before they'll allow me to test. However, the way that it works with Mariner's Learning System and our approval with the Coast Guard is if I take our course, once you begin the program, you have 1 year to complete the course. Once you've completed the course, you have an additional year to meet the requirements of the Coast Guard. And that's the CPR, first aid, drug test, physical, all the things that we're talking about right now. So in my world, I would never fill out the paperwork prior to taking a course like this. With one asterisk, actually, as I'm speaking, I'm thinking through this. The only time that I would recommend that a student fills out the paperwork prior to taking an approved school is if I had a medical condition or if I had some sort of legal concerns that I'm not sure how it would go for me. So if I had legal concerns, I had DWI or more than one DWI in my past, or if I had a medical condition which was chronic or ongoing, I would then recommend to a student prior to taking a course is to submit your application and paperwork to the Coast Guard and make sure that you will qualify before you go through the time and the expense of a school. Now, if you do choose to go that direction, once you submit your paperwork and the Coast Guard gives you, you'll get a letter from them saying that you're approved to take, they will tell you that you're approved for this level license. And once you have that approval letter, you have 12 months to act upon it. So, excuse me. So if you get that letter, now you start a clock. And also, we're going to talk about the drug test and physical. Those have to be done within 6 months of your application. So if you go through a school, you don't have to do any of that stuff until the tail end of it, and you're not worried about artificial timelines. Could you give me some water, please? So that's that. Do we have another question?
Once they pass with us, how long do they have to submit the forms?
Sure. So the question is, once you pass our program, how long do you have to submit the paperwork? So once you complete our course and pass our final exam, we'll provide you with a certificate of completion. That certificate of completion is good for 1 year. We're going to go over it at the end of this. It kind of looks like a diploma. And on the diploma, it'll tell you what course you just passed. It will have a date and be a little bit of a disclaimer that will tell you that once this paperwork was issued, it will have a date of issue. You have 1 year to get that paperwork back into the Coast Guard. So now we're just waiting on my water. I apologize, just a little bit dry in here. Thank you. Any other questions? Excuse me. So that seems to be your questions for now on that section. Let's continue on. So now what we're going to do is just spend a couple minutes on this disclosure statement. In the event that you said yes to any of the questions in the Form 719C, this is the information that you're going to have to deal with. So if you haven't selected a yes, this isn't something you need to be concerned with. But if you have, the Coast Guard considers a plea of guilty or no contest. These are the following things that the Coast Guard will consider that you've received a conviction for. So if you plead guilty or no contest, if you have a deferred adjudication, if you're required to take classes, if you need to pay a fine, or whether you need to give community service, if you have a drug or an alcohol issue and the court told you that you needed to now go into some sort of a treatment, if you are underneath probation or some sort of court supervision, or if you forego an appeal of a court's conviction. So these are all things that the Coast Guard would consider to be a conviction. And again, remember, they're doing this background check. They honestly know. So let's just do an example. Let's say, so I'm 65 years old right now. Let's say that when I was 18, I got busted for, let's do alcohol. So I got a DWI. I was driving, I was drunk, and I got caught. So the Coast Guard's going to say, have I ever had a DWI? The answer is going to be yes. And then there's going to be an area where I'll be able to explain by saying, look, when I was young, I was foolish. I made a mistake. It hasn't happened since. So that's how I would be dealing with that. Now, let's take it a step further. Let's say that I got caught with a bunch of marijuana and I was dealing it. Now, as a youngster or somebody who's 18 years old, the courts could have sealed my conviction or expunged my record after 5 years. Whether they concealed your conviction or they expunged the conviction, when the Coast Guard asks you whether it ever occurred, the answer is yes if it did. So I've seen many people who, when they were younger, get busted for something, and then as an adult or in their mid 40s or 50s, now they're asked, they say, well, no, I really wasn't, because the courts expunged my records. Just because they expunged your records, there is still a record. The Coast Guard's still going to know about this. And the answer has to be yes, because if you tell the Coast Guard no, the issue isn't that you had a conviction when you were younger. The issue is that you lied about that conviction. So again, you got to be really honest and truthful with everything that you tell these people. So this is kind of what the disclosure statement looks like. It's going to have your information in section 2. Again, we start with being honest. In section 2, it's going to ask you what the conviction was, what happened, and then as you go through it, it'll talk a little bit more about the disclosure and explain. And I can understand. So if something had happened to me when I was 18 years old, I wouldn't know the exact dates or things like this. When you make the explanation, just be honest and give them the best information to your knowledge. Don't give them something that can be disproved, or if it is disproved, make sure that it is something that, well, it happened in 86 and 87, and I put down it happened in 85. That's not going to be a big problem. So again, going back on this, we don't have to get too much deeper into this form, but the key to this particular form is we want to make sure that we're honorable and honest and don't lie to the Coast Guard on this stuff, because truly they know. Are there any more questions with convictions or DWIs or anything like that, Sammy?
Not on that.
Okay. So if something comes up after we get done with the section, you're more than welcome to ask the questions. If somebody needs some personal advice on this and you feel more comfortable doing it over the telephone with us, we're not the Coast Guard. We're not the ones who are making the final decision, but we're very happy to provide the expertise or a little additional insight based on the experience that we have working within this industry. So now we're going to go on to the Small Vessel Sea Service form. This is form CG 719S. It's a pretty simple form. There's a couple different ways that you can do this. You can do this with a letter, but the Small Vessel Sea Service form is really what the Coast Guard is looking for. This Small Vessel Sea Service form is basically a form that you're going to use to record your boating experience. Now, with regards to your boating experience, the Coast Guard is going to be looking for a best guess, basically. So you're not going to have to say that April 3rd of 1996, I was on my boat with Bill and Jill and Sam and Fred, and we were on the Chesapeake Bay and we were fishing. It's not like that. It's literally a best guess. If you have logbooks, if you have official logbooks, the Coast Guard does not want you to submit the logbooks, but it will make the process a lot easier. The form itself is you use one form per vessel. And on the next page, we'll show you what the form looks like a little bit further. And each form covers a period of 5 years. So the first section here, section 1, this is just basically your application information, talking about your name, the vessel's name. If you've got a registration certificate or documentation, you're going to have to prove that this boat actually existed. It'll ask you what the weight of the vessel was, what the length was. It'll ask you what the width, they call it breadth. They'll ask you what the width of the vessel was. If you know, they'll also want to know the depth of the vessel. This is more important when you're getting your master's level license than the 6-pack, but you can use general numbers. If you don't know this information, what I always recommend people do is go on the internet and look up that particular boat, and many of the manufacturers will have this information based on their inventory. They'll want to know whether it's a power boat, a steam, a sailing vessel. When we're talking about sailing and auxiliary sailing in the Coast Guard world, when we're talking about auxiliary sail, that means that you had some sort of propulsion system in addition to the sails. So if you're on a small little opti or a dinghy, that's just a sailing vessel. But if you're on a cruising sailboat or something that has a external power source, whether it's gas or electric, the Coast Guard would consider that to be an auxiliary sail. And then they'll ask you, how did you serve on this vessel? And your choices are basically master, mate, operator, deckhand. So if you were operating on that boat in a professional capacity, you're going to select master or mate. So the master is the person who is actually in control of the boat. So let's say that I was working underneath the licensed captain as a mate on the boat. The captain would be considered the master. The mate is the guy who's baiting the hooks. So that's the master or mate. If I was on the boat in a recreational capacity, well, then I would select operator. And then they're going to want to know what bodies of water I was on. For this particular boat, remember, one form per vessel, and this form is going to span a period of 5 years. So they're going to want to know what body of water or bodies of water that we were on this boat while it was underway. So we use an example. Don't just say, if you're from the East Coast, don't just say the Atlantic Ocean. If you're from New Jersey, you would say I was outside in the Atlantic Ocean on the, or outside the Barnegat Bay in the Atlantic Ocean. So they don't need to know the lat and longitude and a very specific area, but they do need to know the general area where you were operating for. Now, this becomes important with either the 6-pack or the master's license. There are two versions of this license: an inland license, or what they call a near coastal license. And an inland license is just what you would think. It's good for inland waterways, rivers, lakes, things like that, bays, inland waters. Near coastal waters are, as a general statement, once you go outside of an inlet on the east or west coast, and you're now in the Atlantic or Pacific, as a general statement, you are outside what they call a boundary line. A boundary line is a fictitious line that you can find on charts, but is the way that the Coast Guard delineates the difference between inland waters and near coastal waters. So it's very important for them to know where that geographic area was, so that they can determine whether you were on inland waters or near coastal waters. This is the bottom portion. This is section 2 of the form. So the way that this works is, if I were doing my sea service form now, June of 99 is about 5 days. June of 2000, about 8 days. June 2001, I was on about 6 days. Do I know that to be factual? No, but I owned a boat during that period of time. Close enough for these purposes. So you'll see this says January, and it'll say the year and the days. So January of 2024, as I'm about 5 days. January of 2023, as I'm about 8 days. January 2000. So again, there's 5 slots. Those represent 5 years and just the number of days that I was out on the water. Now, for a day to count on the water, 4 hours counts as a day. In one 8-hour period of time, I can claim only 1 day. So if I go out at noon and come back at 8 o'clock at night, although I was out on the water for 8 hours, that counts as 1 day. But if I were to go out at 8 o'clock at night and come in at 4 o'clock in the morning, even though that's still my 8 hours, because there are 2 days, the Coast Guard would consider that to be 2 days. All right. So again, this is a best guess. Now, this is an important piece that you need to think through. I've got a quick story of a father and son who took our course, and the father did not get his license, and the son did get his license, and they happened to be in Long Island. We're in the Northeast. They happened to be in Long Island, and they submitted their paperwork to what is called a regional exam center, which there's 19 of them or so in the country. There could be 18. They're opening and closing them. So the last I remember, there was 19. They submitted their paperwork in Miami, And the dad did not get his license, and the guy called me up and said, Bob, do you have any ability to working with the Coast Guard? And although I do work with the Coast Guard very regularly, I have no extra pull. The rules are the rules, the process of processes. All I can do is follow the same rules that everybody else has to, regardless of how much I work with them. But I asked him, I said, so what was your problem? And the son actually worked on his dad's boat with him. And the father, in January and February, he said that he was on his boat 6 days and 10 days and whatever the numbers happened to be. Unfortunately for him, the person who took his paperwork in the regional exam center in Miami happened to be from the same area and from Long Island. And he knew that the body of water that he was claiming 10, 15 days on in January was frozen. Now, the son had the good common sense not doing this. So the father, he had to wait a year to get his license because the days that he claimed, he lied. And the shame of it was that he was a lifetime boater. He did not need to fabricate days in January and February. As far as being out on the water, he had plenty of time on the water. He just thought he was taking a shortcut. He didn't think anyone was going to pay attention. So again, whenever you're filling out this paperwork, make sure that you're always telling the truth. Then on the bottom of the form, you're going to have to verify. Now, with that sea service form, if you own your own boat, you can sign off your own time. If it was on friends or family's boats, they would sign that time off for you. Which is fine. It doesn't really matter. And you do not need to be in a commercial application. You can be out on your own boat. It could be a father, son, mother, daughter, husband, wife, however all that stuff works. You don't have to actively be running the boat. You just need to be physically present on board the boat. In the event that you have somebody else sign off the paperwork for you, down in the bottom, they're going to have to sign this off for you. If it's just you, you're going to just sign off on the top. Now, regardless, if you get caught lying, one of the conditions of signing this, whether it's your boat or an operator, or if you're running somebody else's boat, is if you lie and the Coast Guard catches you, you're subject to a fine and up to 5 years or both of prison. So you want to make sure that whatever you write down is honest and certainly not lying. If you are a military person, there's another form that you need to use. If you are a military person and your job is related to something maritime, and we'll talk about it in a moment, then you're going to be using a different form. Any other questions that we might have on the sea service form, Sammy?
Somebody's wanting to know if they've had time on 10 different boats. Is there a limit on how many sea service forms they can submit?
So that's a good question. So the question was, I've got experience on 10 different boats. Is there a limit to how many sea service forms I can submit? No, it's one form per boat. So if it were 100, you would be sending in 100. And if it were 10 boats over a 20-year period of time, and any of those boats was more than 5 years, you would be sending in 2 or 3 sea service forms on that particular boat. So there is not a limitation to it.
Somebody wants to know, is there cruising sailboat sail or auxiliary sail?
So the question is, I have a cruising sailboat. Is that considered to be a sailing vessel or an auxiliary sailing vessel? So I would fill out the paperwork. If you've got any sort of propulsion on that, it is an auxiliary sailing vessel.
Somebody wants to know, how specific do they need to be with where they do their boating? Do they just say out in the Atlantic, or should they reference certain points, cruising around the Bahamas?
Yeah, so the question is, if I do have offshore experience, or what they call near coastal experience, how specific do I need to be? You don't need to be specific any more than if you're on the Northeast. I was in the Atlantic off of Montauk, or I was in the Atlantic off of Miami, or I was outside of San Francisco Bay things like that. So they do want to know, they do not want to just hear that I am in the Atlantic or I'm in the Pacific. They need to know a little bit more. It does not need to be a precise, but wherever we're boating, there is always I'm off the beach in Hilton Head, North Carolina. There's always a major point that you can use. If I'm in the Bahamas, so to expand upon that question, if I am in the Bahamas are considered to be outside the boundary lines for the Coast Guard's purposes. But I would be picking, I was sailing outside Nassau, Bahamas, or any of the major land masses or the islands that I was sailing near or cruising near. I would make sure that I use that as being very specific.
Somebody wants to know if the owner of the vessel has died, can we use that time?
Yeah, so this is a common question. So if the owner of the vessel has passed, can I still use that time? Almost never. The only time I've seen an exception to this is if it was a husband and wife who perhaps owned it and the wife is still with you, whether our mother or father, and she owned a piece of it, that can be worked through. But for the most part, and there is always going to be an exception, but for the most part, if somebody has passed who signed off your paperwork, that time can't be used.
We'll hit a lot of questions at the end of the webinar to keep things going, but the last question for now is, what were the minimum sea time requirements again? Sure.
So as Sammy said, there's a bunch of questions. We want to keep moving forward. We're going to have plenty of time at the end of the seminar. I'll answer every question that there is that I can. The question is, what was the sea service requirements again? So for a 6-pack or a master's level license, the minimum requirements for either license is 360 days worth of boating experience. 90 days need to be done within the last 3 years. Again, that's an honor system. 4 hours out on the water counts as 1 day. You can sign off your own time, or friends or family boats, they can sign off that time for you. To take this just a step further, that is for a 6-pack or a master's inland license. To get that near coastal license, for the 6-pack, a near coastal license is good for 100 miles offshore. To qualify for that level license, you need a minimum of 360 days worth of boating experience. You still need that 90 days worth of experience in the last 3 years. And out of that total 360 days, 90 of which need to be outside that boundary line. So that is for a 6-pack near coastal. For a master's inland, as I said, 360 days on the water counts as an inland. For a near coastal master's, you need a total of 720 days experience on the water, 360 of which need to be outside the boundary lines. So to get a master's level license with a near coastal endorsement, that's a lot of time on the water. I don't want to make this sound more complex or complicated than it is. However, the license that most get, even though they consider themselves to be a licensed master, which they are, but the license that most people will qualify for if they have experience in the ocean, if you take our master's program and you qualify for a master's level license, if you show 360 days worth of boating experience, 90 days in the ocean, what you can get is a dual purpose license where you would be considered to be a licensed master with an inland license, but you can still take up to 6 paying passengers 100 miles offshore. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. You're a licensed master, so you have the inland, so the 360, 90 in the last 3 years on inland waters, that qualifies you for the master's inland, and that 90 days in the ocean meets the requirements for a 6-pack captain for near coastal purposes. So if you take our program and you get a master's level license, you go through our course, we give you the certificate of completion, you submit that to the Coast Guard. If you have a total of 360 days worth of boating experience, 90 of those days outside the boundary line or in the ocean, you'll get that dual purpose license. where you'll be a licensed master and you can still take 6-pack charters up to 100 miles offshore. Best of both worlds. And most people who are walking around who say they have a master's level license, my experience, that's the license that they carry. So let's move forward. So now just quickly on the military sea service. So with the Coast Guard, 60% of your military time can be counted towards getting the license. Now myself, I'm a Navy guy. I spent 6 years in the military, 4 years on an aircraft carrier. I fixed jets. The boat that I was on was the Midway. And at the time, it was one of the forward most deployed vessels. We were never in port more than 10 days. So in that period of time, I had a bunch of time out on the water, but I wasn't part of ship's crew. I was what they call an Airedale, and I wasn't doing navigational watches. So although I was on board that boat, my time didn't count. Now, if I was a boatsman's mate, or if I was an officer doing navigational watches, or a yeoman attached to the vessel itself, that time can count. But again, with the Coast Guard, only 60% of your time in that type of a job can be counted. So when you get out of the military, there's something called a DD-214 form. The DD-214 alone isn't going to meet this requirement for the Coast Guard. They're going to want to make sure that they actually have your service records. So you're going to have to fill out this form so that the Coast Guard can now get access to your military records. Now, if you were a cook or something like that, your time's not going to be counted on the boat, even though you were at sea. So the important thing with military, if I have 100 days if I was a boatswain's mate attached to a vessel that's in the military, and I was out there for 100 days, I can only claim 60 of those days. It's just the way it is. And remember, I'm going to need to provide the Coast Guard more than my DD-214. I'm going to also have to provide them with my military transcripts. Any military questions?
Let me double check. No, we are good to go.
All right, so no military questions. If something comes up, again, you'll have plenty of opportunities to ask us. Let's see what else we have. So here's another area of concern for many applicants, especially the older you get, the more difficult it is to pass a physical. Again, I know that this paperwork seems to be daunting and overwhelming, but if you do each piece one at a time and you break it down something similar to what I'm doing right now, it's really not that tricky. So here's the application, CG719K. This is the application for what they call a medical certification. And again, the Coast Guard wants to make sure that you're medically sound to be in charge of people's lives. They don't want you to stroke out or have some sort of perhaps predictable episode while you're out on the water based on an existing medical condition. So this just basically confirms that you meet the medical and physical standards and that you'll be able to perform your duties safely. A qualified physician, a physician's assistant, or a nurse practitioner, they all can fill out this paperwork for you. Now, it's a 10-page document. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of this thing. I've just chosen a couple areas where I think are really important and stuff that you want to pay attention to as you're filling this stuff out. And again, if you look at this one in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see that this is a current form because it's got the expiration date. Going back to what we said when we first began this, always make sure that your current forms are current. If they don't have a date 25, 26, 27, 28, don't use the form because most likely the Coast Guard's not going to accept it. So this is a 10-page form. We're not going to go through all 10 pages, but I've pulled out a couple areas that I think are important. So here we're going to fill out our application information again, first name, last name. If you do have a reference number, you're going to have to provide that for them. If you do not have a reference number, you have not been in communications with the Coast Guard, and this is your first license again, you're going to have to put your Social Security number in here. You're not, for what we're doing, Section 2 says for food handler certification. We do not offer courses for food handlers, so their requirements are completely different. You're not going to be required to put any information in here. And when this is all said and done, one of the areas that we see is that people do not sign this off, and they don't fill out the top and the bottom of the form. So make sure that you fill all the blanks that apply to you. And at the end of the day, it needs to be initialed and signed by your medical practitioner. So here's an important portion of this. So this is Section 3. This is talking about some of the medical conditions that the Coast Guard has a concern with. Now, again, these are not necessarily disqualifiers, but these are areas that the Coast Guard is concerned with. So they're concerned with blurry vision, poor night vision, eye disease, eye surgery, color issues, cataracts, or glaucoma. So let's just talk a little bit about the eye thing just for a second. One of the common questions that we hear is, I am colorblind. Am I disqualified from being able to get my captain's license? No. So for instance, myself, red and green, I'm color deficient. I'm not colorblind, but when you put those circles in front of me and ask me what number I see the wrong number. Every time. I don't even look at the circles anymore. There is something called the Farnsworth lantern test, which has a series of 3 lights that they change colors, and I can pass that exam. So for me, I can get past the color vision requirement. For those who can only see black and white or gray, or cannot distinguish between colors, that is not a disqualifier by itself. What they would do is, if that's your primary issue with your eyes, there would be a restriction put on your license that would prevent you from operating professionally at nighttime, which my experience shows that most people who are running their vessels commercially, whether it's charter or cruising on a sailboat, most of them are running during the daytime anyways. But if you are colorblind and you can only see black and white, that is not a disqualifier. You would just have a restriction put on your license that said from sunset to sunrise, you cannot operate your boat professionally. That does not prevent you from running your boat with your family or friends, or if you want to go out and fish at night. That's got nothing to do with it. The only restriction that would be put on is if you're going to be running your vessel professionally for a fee. So that's the eye piece to it. One more thing with the eye. So we get, it's surprising to me how many people have lost an eye because of a BB or a rock or something else. So if you have sight in only one eye, regardless of whether the eyeball is there or not, if you have sight in only one eye, that is not an automatic disqualifier. So let's say that I got shot in the eye with a BB, but my other eye is perfectly healthy. Not a big concern of the Coast Guard. You're most likely not going to be rejected. I would not expect you to be rejected, but as I said earlier, there's examples when things don't work out the way that we always believe they are. So my experience has been, I have yet to run into a person who had an injury to one eye, that was not being able to get licensed because of that. Now, let's say that I have some sort of an eye disease that has the potential of spreading into my other eye. If that's the case, then that may be a disqualifying piece, because the Coast Guard's concerned that you already lost or losing one eye. If it's a disease that go into the other eye, they want to make sure that's a concern of theirs. The eyes are not difficult to get through, but they are going to want to know whether you are colorblind or if you've lost an eye. If it's from a disease, that is a problem. If you have hearing aids, not necessarily a big issue, but again, you got to be able to hear, and you're going to have to be able to pass a hearing test. high or low blood pressure. So on the blood pressure side, sometimes I have high blood pressure. 150 over 90 is the number that I had to be. It may be 140 over 90. I think the Coast Guard made an adjustment on this. But you've got to be below at very least 150 over 90. If you're medicated, that's fine. But if you have high blood pressure or low blood pressure, the Coast Guard is going to be concerned about that. So if you're on medication to control it, that's not a disqualifier. But if you have uncontrolled high or low blood pressure, that is a problem. If you have problems with your heart attack or congestive heart failure or things like that, again, not necessarily a disqualifier. So let's say that you had a stent put in, not a disqualifier by itself. What the Coast Guard would require is that you have a letter from your cardiologist. They state that this is not a reason not to get your license, and that you've gone at least 18 months without anyone going in there and tinkering with your heart. So if they've had to make some adjustments or put in some additional stents, that's going to be a problem. But if you've got 18 months of clean health and no one's had to go in there and mess around with your heart, if the Coast Guard is still concerned based on some of your other physical attributes, they may require a stress test. But I've got plenty of people who've had bypass surgery or they've had stents put in their hearts and they're licensed. Again, heart surgery, the Coast Guard's going to always be concerned if somebody's messing. If you've got a pacemaker or something like that, not necessarily a disqualifier, but something for sure the Coast Guard's going to look at. Lung disease, if you have blood disorders, diabetes. Diabetes is another one. So diabetes, if you are type 2, not a disqualifier, but they're going to want to make sure your A1C is below 8. If your A1C is below 8 and your diabetes are controlled, well, then you're still going to be able to become licensed. But type 1 diabetic, much more difficult. That's something earlier I was talking about, if I had medical conditions, would I fill out the paperwork? If I was a type 1 diabetic or if I had significant heart disease, these would be people that I would recommend, why don't you fill out the paperwork, go do the physicals and all those other things and have the Coast Guard tell you whether you are or not approved for a license prior to spending the money on a course. If you just want to learn, that's great. But before you go and pursue a license itself, make sure these things are cool. If you have problems with your thyroid, your stomach, your liver, kidney, these are all general stuff. Sleep. So sleep apnea. If you have sleep apnea, that is a concern of the Coast Guard. Again, not a disqualifier, but certainly a concern. They may require that you have a sleep study, and based on the results of the sleep study, you may be able to get through. If you are epileptic or if you have seizures, that's a problem. If you have frequent headaches, dizziness, motion sickness, kind of like a problem, especially if you have to be medicated, that is a concern. If you have any psychiatric disorders, back or neck or joint problems, I have problems with my back and some joints. They do not prevent me from being able to do the job of or do the duties of a licensed captain out on the water in the event of emergency. So not a reason for me not to be licensed. And then they just want to know any major cancers, illnesses, disabilities, things like this. So it's pretty extensive. They do have concerns, but in life, and the longer that we do these things, the longer that we're still here, I would have to check a couple of these things off, and I still have my license without problems. They just want an explanation. They want to make sure a doctor tells you everything's cool. So with that, if you do check yes on any of those things, the Coast Guard's going to want some sort of an explanation. So the Section 3 is kind of like a deep dive. So if I said yes to any of these things, I'll tell them what the condition is. I'll tell them what the treatment is. I'll give them an idea of what the status is and any limitations that may create for me. Again, be honorable and honest, and that's a much better path than pretending like something is different than what it actually is. Then they're also going to want to know what medications you're taking. They're going to be very interested in what you've taken over the last 3 to 6 months. And now, once you submit this paperwork, there will be a medical professional who reviews and verifies all that information. There's several other sections of this. These are the sections that the medical practitioner is going to fill out. It's going to have information on your hearing, your eyesight. There's going to be some general questions as far as your physical ability. Can you pick things up? Can you drop things? Can you get through a tight space? Can you operate in the event of an emergency? We really didn't spend too much time on this because this is really things that your medical practitioner is going to be filling out along with this paperwork. And then finally, this is a application consent. So this is going to give the Coast Guard the ability to bring up any physical concerns with your doctor specifically. And if you've not paid somebody to complete the application, you'll just leave B and C of this particular section. So this is just when you go to a doctor's office, doctor says, do I have consent to speak to third parties? This is pretty much what that's doing within this form, so you can make that decision. So that's the medical form. Are there any questions on this, Tammy?
Somebody wants to know, do they have to go to their doctor or can they go to any doctor?
So you do not need to go to your doctor. The question is, do I have to go to my doctor or can I go to any doctor? So you can go to any qualified doctor that you choose to. It does not have to be your doctor. Myself, when I was getting licensed, I was doing a lot of traveling and I was moving boats all around the world. I did not have a physical doctor, so I went to those emergency places you see all over now. It cost me like $65. I brought in my applications, and a couple of the places I went to, they were more used to people showing up with gunshot wounds or stab wounds. I just wanted a general physical. So mine was pretty easy to go through those, but you do not need to go to your own physical doctor to have this perform. It's basically like if you're looking like a DOT, a Department of Transportation approved doctor, or a DOT, we'll talk about drug testing in a bit, DOT doctor or DOT lab, they'll be able to handle it. You do not need to have special qualifications, but I will tell you that some doctors, when you hand them a 10-page form, there are doctors who will not fill this form out for you. So to go on that, I would tell them, so if I were making an appointment with a doctor that I did not know, I would tell them that I'm about to get my captain's license and I need them to certify my medical condition. Is this something that this doctor can do for you? And most will say yes, but there are some that will not fill out this form.
Somebody wants to know, is there an age limit? They're 75 and in good health.
So the question is there an age limit to getting my captain's license? And this particular person says that they're 75 years old and they're in good health. Well, I got to tell you, you're still a youngster. You're still a young chicken in our world, because we've recently had a 94-year-old gentleman go through and get his license. So the answer to that question is there is no upper level. So to get your license for a 6-pack, you need to be at least 18 years old. For the master's level license, you need to be 19 years old or older. On either license, there is not an upper level. The Coast Guard is really looking at your health. So you could be 43 and not in good health and still not get your license. You could be 94 and in great health and still get your license. So there is not an upper age limit on it. And truly, being 63, 64, 60, or 73, 74, 75, you're not even reaching truly in our world the upper ages of people who go through our courses. Okay, so that's that on the medical stuff. Excuse me. So we're going to go over the drug testing form. This is CG 719P. So this is kind of what the form looks like. You'll need to go to what they call a DOT approved lab. DOT stands for Department of Transportation. And you're going to do a 5-panel urinalysis. This is not a blood test. They're not going to take blood. You're going to pee in a cup and they're going to test it. Now, when you call them, so before you go to this lab, call them and tell them that you need a DOT-approved 5-panel drug test. Now, if they say there's a special form that needs to be filled out, if they say bring the form with you, find another lab, they're not going to be approved by the Coast Guard. If they say, sure, come on in, then just qualify them by saying, do you have the proper forms? And if this is what they do and it's a DOT-approved lab that does 5-panel drug tests, they will do this every day, all day. And they will say, of course we have the form. But just as a friendly piece of advice, if you go to a drug lab and they say, bring your form with you, don't go to that don't go to that drug testing facility unless you want to pee in another bottle, because it won't be accepted by the Coast Guard. So they'll have the form, and they will also have a medical review officer who will sign this off for you. And with the Coast Guard, as I said when we first began this, with my drug test and my physical, it has to be done within 6 months of my application. So remember when we talked about the Mariners Learning System approval, once you begin the course, not when you purchase it, once you begin the course, you have a year. That means you signed in. Once you sign into your program for the first time, you have a year to complete it, and then you have an additional year to meet the requirements. I would not, unless I had a specific job or I wanted to do this process quickly, I wouldn't do my drug test and then start my course, because now you got 6 months to get everything done. There are plenty of people who are looking for a job, or they want to use their license for the summer and things like that, and they want to get it all out of the way. That's fine. But literally, you can go to a drug testing lab. I could make an appointment for next week if I wanted to. So just keep this in mind, that your results are good for 6 months. Not 6 months in a day, but 6 months. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your drug test. And the results will be sent to you, not directly to the Coast Guard. Anything on drug testing?
Let's see. Somebody asked, so you have to go back to the DOT lab to pick up the form, or do you get it the same day?
Sure. So yeah. So the question is, do you have to go back to the DOT approved lab for the form, or will you pick it up on the same day? They're not going to process your urine on the same day. And most of them will send them to you, and most of them will transfer it through a portal electronically in a PDF format that you can download and provide for the Coast Guard.
Somebody wants to know if they're already enrolled in a random drug testing program with the DOT for work. Can they use that?
Sure. So this is a good question. So the question is, I'm already enrolled in a random DOT approved drug testing program. Does that count? The answer is yes. So if I'm in a random drug testing program and I have not failed or refused to take a drug test within the last 180 days, the Coast Guard will accept that. Doesn't mean that I was tested. Doesn't mean that I got called, but I could have been called. As long as it's an approved DOT drug test, and in the last 180 days you have not failed a drug test or refused to take a drug test, the Coast Guard will accept this. We will find this most times in first responders, firemen, police officers, Coast Guard, military. So if you're in the military, you're in some sort of a random drug testing program, that will be counted as well. Anything else?
We're good to continue.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the TWIC card. It's called the Transportation Workers Identification Credential. This is called the TWIC card. So again, this is the background check that the Coast Guard is going to put you through. This is done through TSA. And although it's through TSA, this is not the card that you use to get to the front of the line at the airport. If you have that pass, you're going to go to the same place that you receive this, because it's TSA, but a TWIC card is different. So what a TWIC card basically does for you is it allows you it does a few things. So one of the things that a TWIC card does is this is the background check that the Coast Guard uses to make sure that you're suitable for getting a captain's license. It's a biometric card, and it has a biometric strip that has information that is pertinent only to you. This picture is what a current TWIC card looks like. A TWIC card is also required if you're a licensed captain or if you're a worker in an area or a dock or a shipyard that has sensitive information or a sensitive area. So this will get you into those as well. So this is the Coast Guard's primary effort for doing background checks. You're going to have to prove that you hold a TWIC card. And again, on your initial one, you're going to have an active TWIC card for renewals. The fact that you went through the TWIC process, the Coast Guard, in most, at least today, they will accept that. There's a series of documents that you're going to have. You're going to get on the internet. Most times you can't call. You have to do it. You're going to schedule an appointment. So you're going to pre-enroll. Then you're going to go down there. It generally takes, my experience with doing these is, especially with the appointments, you're in and out in 10 or 15 minutes. It's not a big thing. They're going to take some paperwork from you. They're going to take a picture, and they're going to send you on your way. The fee for a TWIC card is $125.25. It changes ever so slightly, and there are some exceptions that you might pay like $100, but you can pretty well figure that the fee for the TWIC card is $125.25. One of the most important things when you fill out the application for the TWIC card, make sure that you identify yourself as an applicant for a merchant mariner as your occupation. What that does for you is that allows the National Maritime Center's database, the NMC, that allows their database to talk to TSA with regards to your application. If you don't click that off, or if you don't tell them that it's for your merchant mariner credentials, the National Maritime Center is not going to be able to communicate. They're not going to be able to upload this information, and therefore they're not going to be able to complete the approval process. And this would be a reason why your forms were delayed. So it's called a TWIC card, TWIC. There's no, I hear people all the time, well, I don't have to get, you're going to need a TWIC card. Any questions on this?
Somebody wants to know the TSA pre-check.
Yeah, so that TSA pre-check, good for you. So you go through the airport even faster. I love my TSA pre-check, but TWIC card is very different than the TSA pre-check. You're going to go, if you live in the same area that you got your pre-check from, you're going to go to the very same facility. You're going to give them another $125, and you're going to fill out some different paperwork. The pre-check and a TWIC card, although it's the same organization, the TSA, who's doing this for you, they're two completely different documents, and one will not work for the other, vice versa. And you can't go and go to the front of the line with a TWIC card either. That's it. All right. So adult CPR and first aid, this is a requirement of getting either one of the two licenses. You'll need to prove that you've successfully completed a CPR basic first aid course within the last year. So an area where we see people getting in trouble with their CPR and first aid card is many of these cards are issued and they are valid for a 2-year period of time. Not uncommon. But the Coast Guard they want this credential to be issued within 1 year of your application. So it's 100% possible to have a qualified card, a card that is still valid, but the Coast Guard refuse it. So when you're doing this, remember, the card has to be issued within 12 months of your application. Even if your card is valid, if it's outside that 12 months, the Coast Guard is not going to recognize the card. You can argue with them and you can make your point as strongly as you would like, but the end result is never going to change. Even though you have a valid card, they are not going to change the rule. The card has got to be issued within 12 months of your application. There are a bunch of organizations that you can use we recommend the American Red Cross, the Heart Association, or any other Coast Guard approved CPR training course. A very common question we get, especially since we teach all of our courses online, is can I take CPR and first aid online? My knowledge is currently, as of this conversation, there are not any approved schools that allow you to take, that are approved by the Coast Guard. There are schools out there that teach CPR and first aid online, but I'm unaware of any that are approved by the Coast Guard. And I know of one or two that have in the past been approved by the Coast Guard, but their credentials expired and they did not go through the proper processes of renewing. So, and the reason for that is with the CPR portion of this and the first aid, there is some hands-on. You're going to have to be able to do compressions. You're going to have to do breaths. You're going to have to be able to wrap somebody up and treat them for different wounds. So the Coast Guard, for a captain's license, they allow online training because you need that 360 days worth of boating experience. They consider that to be your practical knowledge. When it comes down to CPR and first aid, not a lot of people have experience practicing CPR or even basic first aid. And that's why the Coast Guard requires that course to be in a physical location. One of the reasons why we don't do it online ourselves. Again, American Red Cross, the Heart Association, those are two organizations that work very well. Wherever you go, make sure that they are approved by the Coast Guard. Now, for this, you're going to need the adult CPR and basic first aid. Now, the example that we have up on the screen shows that you got CPR, AED, and first aid. If you take a course and they do AED, that's the defibrillator. If they do that, that's fine, but you need to have at very least adult CPR and basic first aid. Many of the CPR schools will also do infants, and there's a couple other variations of it. That's all fine as long as you have an adult CPR and basic first aid course. Anything above and beyond that, that's cool, but this is what you need. Now, we hear doctors, we hear nurses, we hear all sorts of practitioners who say, well, I'm a licensed doctor. True enough. And for sure, you've got superior knowledge to most. However, the Coast Guard's looking for an adult CPR and basic first aid card. It would be in your best interest to provide that for them. Will they take your credentials? They will. But now you're going from the good pile of paperwork to the pile of paperwork that they're going to have to verify that your credentials are good. Most hospitals, especially if you're a professional, most hospitals, many of the first aid squads, many of the fire departments, they do this stuff for free. If you have to pay for it, you should pay no more than $65. But if you're a professional, you can go to the American Red Cross and say that I'm a professional, I need a card. And they'll, in most instances, they will allow you to test out. And if you are a professional and this is what you do, it's a very, very simple exam that you should be able to finish up in 5 or 10 minutes. So you can use your credentials for sure, no doubt. And the Coast Guard will most likely say, oh, yeah, these are great. But again, you're looking for the paperwork process to go as smoothly as possible. And my recommendation would be to provide them with an adult CPR and basic first aid card. That would be my advice. Any questions with regards to this stuff?
Somebody wants to know if their wilderness first responder credentials will suffice.
Yeah, so the question is, I have a wilderness first responder. Will those credentials suffice? I don't know. So this would be a situation where I would reach out to the National Maritime Center. They'll take those credentials and they will either tell you that they are valid or they are not. Building on what I had said earlier, if they do say that they're valid, then I would make sure I had an email with some sort of confirmation so that when I submit my paperwork, I have that with it. Okay, so let's talk about the next piece to this is meeting the written requirements for your license. So, excuse me, one of the benefits of going through Mariner's Learning System is, as I said in the beginning of this, we're approved by the Coast Guard. When you complete our course and pass our exam, we'll provide you with a certificate of completion that the Coast Guard will accept in lieu of taking their exam. Again, regardless of whether you choose to go with Mariners or you want to go someplace else, that's fine. Obviously, we'd like you to do it with us, but regardless, the information is still the same. What you're going to do is you're going to get a certificate of completion. In our particular case, this is what a sample of that certificate of completion looks like. We have an electronic course locker that once you pass your exams, this certificate of completion is uploaded into this, and you have the ability of downloading or getting the certificate sent to you, to your email in a PDF format so that you can include it with your application. Now, what you will also on here is you'll see that there's an issue date. This issue date is good for 1 year. So again, if you're working with Mariners, once you pass our exam, we're going to issue this certificate of completion is good for 12 months, not 12 months in a day. And this is true with anybody. So once these certificate of completions expire, so if you go 1 year and a day, the Coast Guard is going to consider that certificate as never existing, and you're going to have to go through the whole process again. So do yourself a favor. Don't allow that thing to expire once you've got it. Any questions on that?
No.
I hear silence. Good. Let's keep going. So let's talk about the MMC, the issuance fees, the MMC, Merchant Mariner Credential, your captain's license. What's this going to cost you? So with the Coast Guard, they charge a fee, which is designed basically to cover the administrative cost associated with reviewing your package. So you're going to have to pay online, and then you'll have the ability of printing out a receipt. In this particular case, you're going to go on there. There's the National Maritime Center's website. You're going to click off that this is for your credential. It's an officer's credential. The original officer credential is going to cost you $100. For the evaluation fee, for them to issue the fee is going to cost you $145. So the cost on the application is $145. And remember, if you have not been communicating with them, you're going to have to provide your Social Security number unless they've already given you some sort of a merchant mariner number, and then you would refer to that. So as of the January 19th, 2025, the NMC, the National Maritime Center, and RECs, the regional exam centers, will exclusively accept user fee payments via the Merchant Mariner user fee payment on pay.gov. So you have no other way of paying for this. This is the only way that they're going to accept it, and it's all through pay.gov. So that was pretty quick. Any questions on the payments?
Let's see. Nope.
All right, let's continue forward. So let's talk about submitting my paperwork. So now I've got everything. I've got all my forms done. I've passed my exam. I've got my CPR and first aid. I've got my results for my drug test. I've got my medical paperwork filled out. I've got my general application filled out. My practitioner has signed and initialed every place that they were supposed to. I've got my C-Service forms. They're correctly signed off. One of the things on the C-Service forms that I didn't say that is a very common mistake is, remember, there were 5 columns, and in each column there was a number of days. When you work with your C-Service form, make sure that you're using a calculator, because if the number of days that you qualified for is different than your totals, and they will total it, if there's a difference, then they're not going to approve your paperwork. So make sure, and I've seen really smart people, brilliant people who are far smarter than I, who take 1 and 1 and they come up with 3. Now they know it's 2, but they, for whatever reason, they put down 3. If you do that, the Coast Guard is going to kick your paperwork back to you. You don't want that to happen. So make sure you use a calculator, and specifically on the C-Service form, make sure that you double check all your days and make sure that they all add up to whatever your totals are. So now for an original captain's license right now, and this does change, it really depends upon the workloads and various other internal things. But right now it's taking the Coast Guard an average 4 to 6 weeks to review your paperwork and issue the license. Now, this is provided that your paperwork is accurate and there aren't any mistakes. If there are mistakes, well, then you're put in the wrong pile, and I've seen people take 4 and 5 months to get their license. Now, this 4 to 6 weeks may sound like a lot of time. I got my first license in 2001 or so. My first license, the wait time was almost 8 months. So 4 to 6 weeks is really pretty quick. And again, if you fill it out properly, you can expect them to move quicker. But if there are mistakes or errors, you can pretty well figure that there's going to be some sort of a problem. We just included, we'll provide access to this stuff. The Merchant Marine Credentials, the NMC, the National Maritime Center, they have a specific website, NMC applications at uscg.mil. This is where they're going to accept these things. And then the medical certificate, of course, they've got a different department and they've got a different email address to this. And we'll provide all this stuff where you don't have to worry about this. Now, although you can fill out the forms, as long as they're legible, they don't have to be electronically filled out, although many of the forms you can. The Coast Guard no longer wants you to mail in originals. So you're going to take all your forms, you're going to scan them into a PDF, one application package, and you're going to send that off. For original captain's licenses, like I said, it's normally 4 to 6 weeks. I always recommend that you always send it in 90 days sooner than what you think you need it for. This is just reviewing a little bit that this is the format in which they want the paperwork filled out. So they want your last name, your first name, and then if you have a mariner reference number. This is just how they're going to identify this. Down towards the bottom, you'll see an example, Smith _ John _ and whatever the 1, 2, 3, that just happens to be the number. This is what they're looking for. And they don't want links and things like that. So they will not be accepted. Try to keep everything in one package. You don't want to send a sea service form and then send my medical certificate and then send my certificate of completion. Package them all together. Do what they ask you to do, and it'll move a lot smoother for you. So the National Maritime Center, there's a few different ways that you can reach them. One is through the toll-free number, 888-427-5662. My experience with this is I'd be calling them at like 7 o'clock in the morning, 7:30 in the morning. Earlier the better. The later the day goes, the busier and the longer you're going to sit in a queue. I would be calling 7:30 as early as possible. They will also take an email. I will tell you that when I have to communicate with the National Maritime Center, myself personally, although there is a phone number available and it is toll-free, I like using the email system. One, they reply to it. Two, there's a record that I actually sent it to them because I will get a response with a number. And they are judged and they are rated on their performance on how fast they return emails. And three, if they say something and it's in writing, then I can take that to the bank for the most part that this is true and accurate. If I talk to them on the telephone and now I do something based on the recommendation that I was given over the telephone, and I have a problem with paperwork and I talk to that person who's going through my process as well, I talk to Sam on the phone, that's not gonna fly. They don't know Sam, they don't know whether I'm telling the truth, and it doesn't really matter because they're gonna say, do you have proof? Did you have an email? Or another way that you can do it that works pretty well is they do have a chat bot 24/7. There are live agents who are monitoring that during the business day hours. It works. There's nothing wrong with using the chat bot. From myself, I like sending the emails. It's just that's just a personal preference, but these are the 3 different ways that you can contact the Coast Guard and the National Maritime Center. Any questions or answers with this?
No, you're good.
Okay, we're still good. So now the license, the credentials have been issued. So on the right-hand side, you'll see what they look like. It kind of looks like a passport with your credentials. Once on March 1st, 2024, the Coast Guard began issuing a new set of credentials in this format. They have replaced it. It still looks like a passport, but the old ones literally looked like a passport. Now this is a document that folds kind of into quarters so that there's more information that can be put there. Once you do get your credentials, you should for sure review it and make sure that they've been filled out accurately. If you have any issues, your name is spelled wrong, your social security number, whatever is incorrect, or it's the incorrect license, or there's any concerns, let the National Maritime Center know immediately. You need to sign your credentials. So there's going to be a spot on your credentials that you need to sign. You need to use a black or blue ballpoint pen. Don't use a permanent marker or gel type pens because they generally smear. You cannot laminate your credentials. I know that you're out on the water and you think they should be protected, but if you do choose to laminate them, then they are no longer valid, and your MMC, your Merchant Mariner credential, it cannot be used as a passport. Don't modify the document, and when you'll see it, you can fold it into quarters, which is what I would do, and there'll be a medical certificate that will come with it that you need to keep with your credentials. So you need to keep those things together. Any questions with regards to that?
No.
So we're just going to talk about mariners for a little bit. This stuff sounds like a lot, and we do have a solution. Remember, I told you that I'm not a paperwork guy, although that's a large portion of what I do. I hate filling out forms and I hate doing paperwork. So we've made a deal with MMCs, a company called MMCs. I don't have any other partnerships. I'm not a big guy in my world. For me, a rule that I always live by is that partnerships are easy to get into and expensive to get out of. So we are not partners in the sense that we share revenue, but MMCs, in my opinion, is the best at doing the paperwork that I've ever seen. And they've got a pretty seamless process that is truly pretty stress-free. So we've worked out an arrangement where if you purchase a Mariners Learning System course or you're a Mariners Learning System student, you have 2 years worth of access to MMCs Pro for free, and they would normally be charging $198 for this service. So what they do is we're very good at the educational piece of this. We're very familiar with the forums, but the forum piece isn't what we do. So if you go with Mariners and you get access to this MMC's support for their pro version, you will have access to Coast Guard licensing experts. You can talk to them on phone. You can do a video call for issues that are a little bit more difficult, but they can really help with the paperwork process. Now, be aware, with this particular level, they're not filling out the forms for you, and they're happy to answer questions, and they're happy to give you guidance and guidelines and all those other things. But it's not here's my forms, fill this thing out for me. You're going to still have to do the work, but they'll make sure that your forms and paperwork are very clean and clear. They also have an app which is really easy to use. It has all your documents and all your forms in an electronic format. And once you complete all these things, it will consolidate them all and prepare a PDF file that you can send into the Coast Guard directly. Really, really good organization. For those of you who are on this call who are part of the Mariners Learning System Network, it's free. For those of you who are not, who are just trying to get advice on how to fill out, which is fine, I would strongly recommend MMCs, whether you come to me or come through us, or you're just out there through another school. They're truly a good operation. And again, I don't very often recommend places, but these guys are good at what they do. Any questions with the MMCs or any of the application stuff?
We have plenty of application questions, but we'll save those for
All
the
right.
very end, but not with MMCs.
So let's talk a little bit. So there's no questions. We got lots of questions that we're going to hit at the end of this thing. Using your license professionally. So there's a few things that you need to make sure of. Is if you are using your license professionally, you do need to be in a random drug testing program, and you do need to be carrying a valid adult CPR and basic first aid card. So before I was talking a little bit about if you're in a state that allows you to use marijuana recreationally, you're going to have to pass a drug test. But if you're not using your license professionally, then you're not going to be in a random drug testing program and you can make your own decisions. But if you are going to use your license professionally, you do need to be in a DOT random drug testing program. Now, I happen to be in one. I've been in one for 20 plus years. I've never once gotten called. Doesn't mean that now because I said that and it's recorded, I'm going to get called tomorrow, but I've never gotten called. And I know other people who've gotten called 2 or 3 times in a year. So it's truly a random drug testing program. There are these things that they call consortium or consortiums. It's normally a fee of $65 to $150 or so a year. Each one of these consortium or consortiums, they offer different levels of service, but the idea of being in a random drug testing program, if you do get called, you got 3 business days to go pee in a cup. If you don't pee in the cup and you don't have a reason. So let's say that I got called, but I was in Europe on business. All right. The Coast Guard is going to understand that. But as soon as I get back, I'm peeing in a cup. Things like that. Or I was in a hospital, or there are exceptions, but those exceptions are very few and far between. So if you do get called and you are in a random drug testing program, go take care of business. If you don't test, then your license is going to be suspended. And if you're not working professionally, we also recommend that you keep a logbook of the time that you're out on your water, so that when you do fill out your sea service form the next time around, it'll be a little bit easier for you. Any questions with that?
No.
Okay, so we're just going to talk a little bit about renewing an existing 6-pack or master's license. So in doing that, if you already have a 6-pack or a master's license and we're in a renewal situation, you're going to have to fill the Merchant Marine credential. You're not going to have to do the oath. The Section 2, remember before we said original license, this is going to be an officer renewal. You're going to have to pass a drug test or be able to prove that you were in a random drug testing program. To renew your license, that 5-year period of time, so your license is good for 5 years. Once the license was issued, you got 5 years. You don't have 5 years and a day, so that license is good for 5 years. During that 5-year period of time, you need to show that you have 360 days worth of boating experience. Now, for some, that's a lot of time on the water in 5 years. If that's the case for you, Mariners Learning System has a program called a Deck License Renewal course that is a relatively simple course. It goes back over deck general, deck safety, and rules of road. There's no chart plotting. It'll take you 8 or 10 hours to finish, and we'll give you a certificate of completion that the Coast Guard will accept in lieu of the time on the water. So from the day that your license was issued to that 5th anniversary, during that period of time, if you have 360 days worth of boating experience, it's just paperwork. If you don't have that 360 days on the water in those 5 years, if you take our deck license renewal course, we'll give you a certificate of completion that the Coast Guard will accept. You're going to have to submit a copy of your TWIC card. Right now, the TWIC card doesn't have to be valid, but that could change by the time it's time for you. You're going to pay the application fee through pay.gov. You're not going to be required to provide the Coast Guard with a recent CPR and first aid certificate, but it is required if you're using your license professionally. So make sure that your CPR and first aid certification is up to date, although you will not have to submit that on your renewal. And to make it easier, front and back, include a copy of your current credentials. You can give them the number and all that other stuff, but again, you have somebody doing paperwork, make it easier for them. Just make a copy of the front and back of your paperwork. Any questions with regards to that?
Somebody wants to know if their license expired a long time ago. What do they need to do?
Yeah. So the question is, my license expired a long time ago. What do I need to do? So there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is the fact that it expired a long time ago means that the license is no longer issued valid, and the Coast Guard is not going to consider you never to have had a license. That's how they're going to look at it. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that the 360 days that you used, or whatever time you used to get that original license, is still good. So if you want to go for a new license, there are schools out there that say, oh, yeah, you can renew the license. Yeah, it's a net new license. So don't allow people to use language to convince you of something that's not true. You're not renewing that license. You're going to have a net new license issued if you go through the process. The good news is whatever time that you use for your original license is still good. That time does not go away. And I don't know that I mentioned it, but when we're doing our sea service time, your time goes back to your 16th birthday. And again, you have to be able to prove that you had that time. So if you were 16 and you were on your parents' boat and they're no longer here, you're not going to be able to count that time. But your sea service time can go all the way back to your 16th birthday. Anything else on this?
And then one person said, can you go over the renewal boating experience requirements again?
Sure. So there's a question, can I just review the boating requirements for a license renewal? So from the day that the license was issued to your 5th anniversary, so the license is good for 5 years, and there'll be a date on your license. So during that 5-year period of time, if you have 360 days worth of boating experience in those 5 years, not prior to that, just those 5 years, then you're going to fill out the application form. If you cannot meet that 360-day requirement within 5 years, which is really difficult, especially if you have a family or a job, even if you're retired, 360 days in 5 years, you're out there a lot. That's a fair amount of time out on the water. So if that happens, we have something called a deck license renewal course, which should take you 10 or 12 hours to finish. It basically covers a review of the rules of the road and what we call deck safety and deck general. There's no chart plotting on it. It's not a course that very many people ever fail. It's a good refresher course, and that's exactly what it is. When you complete that course and pass our final exam, we'll provide you with a certificate of completion. You submit that to the Coast Guard with your renewal application. They will accept that certificate in lieu of having that 360 days on the water. So if you've got your license and life gets in your way and you just can't get that time on the water, that is not a good reason for you to allow your license to expire. And I always tell people, regardless, don't allow your license to expire. Along that, we weren't really going to talk about this, but it fits on this line. So let's say that I'm 80 years old now, and I can't meet the medical requirements of getting keeping my captain's license, but I don't want to lose it. So there's something called continuity, which allows me to go through the process and basically put my license on hold. So I'm still a licensed captain. The Coast Guard still has you're going to have to fill out an application and paperwork. And if you have questions on that, you can give us a call and we're happy to help you with that. But I'm still filling out an application and all those other things. And I'm going to request that they put my license in continuity. And again, that means I didn't lose my license. I can't use my license. I can still consider myself to be a licensed captain. But my license is on hold. And let's take it early. Let's say that I'm 50 years old and I had somebody tinkering with my heart and I can't pass the physical today. But now fast forward, I'm 60 and everything's cool, and I want to take my license out of continuity. I can do that. So don't, if you get your license, and even if for medical conditions or whatever, I would strongly recommend that you put your license on ice and go through the process of getting it put in continuity. And that way it's always there and you've never lost it. And I would consider anyone who's got their license in continuity as a licensed captain. They can't use their license professionally, but in my world, they still deserve the title. Anything else? Let's see what else we got. So this is just our information. We're just about done with this portion of it. We have a website, marinerslearningsystem.com. You can call us at 609-303-0664. We have an email support at Mariners Learning System. We also have a chat AI robot 24/7. We also have live human support during the business day. What is our current hours for people now?
9 to midnight.
So yeah, we have a pretty sophisticated chat bot. AI is crazy, and the program that we're using is way beyond Chat GPT. This stuff uses the ability, information on our website, and it can answer most questions very well. And it almost appears as if it's a person. We don't pretend that it's not, but it's very good. But on the East Coast, we have live human support, real people who are answering telephones and answering chats between 9 a.m. and 12 midnight. So I'm unaware of any other school that offers that type of support out there. I know it's important for us to answer these types of questions, and that's why we're there. The other thing that you can also do is we have a help center that is a ticket system that you can submit tickets to the help center, and it will be routed to the appropriate department.